Chapter 2. "What are you doing?" shouted the German, crawling up to where Dario was piloting the Delta-5 toward Earth's exosphere. "We'll be safer inside the cloud bank." "No. I'd rather watch them come." But this time, Dario had to learn something new. For the moment, he didn't realize that the controls weren't responding. The reaction-powered craft he was piloting had become immobile in the air, several miles above the cloud bed. Dario had to bite his lips. This convinced him he was still alive. After all, he had never seen a 20-ton craft, stationary and suspended in the air. Under what malevolent influence was the craft remaining, against all gravitational laws, still in the air? He found no answer to his astonishment. The most he did was turn his face toward Karen Vassiliev and the professor. And in their faces, he saw his own shock reflected. For a moment, the names of many scientists from the 15th to the 24th century flashed through Cox's mind, wondering if they had all been blind as moles. To see this. To see and have me explain why. "They're not shooting anymore," he heard the German professor say behind him. "Don't you see, Cox? Something is coming towards us." "Right, Karen, do you assume who they are?" "I'm not assuming, Franz, I know. Those who killed Paul won't take long to kill us too. But, will you tell me once and for all what this means?" "Don't get upset, young man," said the professor calmly. "It's a threat that we're speaking to you first. They are extraterrestrial invaders, the beings from Zokla or Chakla, which we know as being from the Antares binary system, in the remote constellation of Scorpio, and humanity must fight them if we don't want to become their slaves." Dario looked through the cockpit glass and saw, amazed, how a massive rocket was stopping in the air a short distance from the immobile atomic reactor Delta-5. "And now what, Goethe?" asked the young woman to the German. "We still have the Thomason, distinguished colleague," answered Schwartz, manipulating his device. Dario didn't listen to them, as he was focused on the stationary rocket at close distance. Suddenly, he saw a hatch open. And immediately something resembling a being, but without a head, with long dangling arms, completely dressed in blue, wearing a sack-like robe, appeared through the ship's opening. Dario watched as more of those singular beings emerged. And he saw them walk smoothly, above the air molecules, without holding onto anything. They moved in a line toward the Delta-5, walking on the intangible, defying the laws of gravity. And as they got closer, he distinguished something like a periscope emerging from the blue garment where the head should be. Under the sunlight, that vision looked ghostly, strange, hallucinatory. The periscopes were shining, and the same happened with the streamers they seemed to carry in their hands. Dario deduced they must be unknown weapons. Finally, the first of those beings positioned itself on the wings of the Delta-5, and with a swaying, simian step, approached the cockpit windows. The metallic periscope looked inside. Meanwhile, the three occupants of the terrestrial craft looked at each other without changing a single word. Immediately after, several of those blue-clad simian beings approached, suddenly adopting the same stance as the first. Next, something very similar to a metallic screech was heard through the craft's double metallic bulkhead. The strange noise repeated twice more, and the space explorer saw how the androids or extraterrestrial beings were trying to penetrate the Delta-5. But he didn't move from his seat. "Can this open from the inside, Mr. Cox?" asked Schwartz. "Yes, by pressing this lever." "Do you think we should let them in?" "Yes, otherwise they'll use their weapons, which might be disintegrators." Karen Vassiliev, very pale, leaned on Dario's arm. Then, the three turned their gaze back to the doorway that was slowly opening on the side of the Delta-5. At that moment, the first fantastic being peeked through the opening. Another being approached, gesticulating with its arms, though not uttering a single word. Dario saw that this one wasn't carrying any weapon, but at the end of its sleeve, and unlike the other, it wore gloves on hands that bore some resemblance to human ones. "They say to come out," exclaimed Schwartz. "How do you know that?" asked a puzzled Dario. "I just assume," responded the other. "But in these cases, you can't be polite and say, 'ladies first.' I think here you, Mr. Cox, have the most justified fame." The Brazilian caught the reference. And since he wasn't a coward, he left the cockpit. Dario Cox had lifted the visor of his space helmet, and upon exiting to position himself on the Delta V's wing, a gust of fresh breeze hit his face. Then he looked at the strange beings moving around his craft. One, who seemed to be the group's leader and appeared unarmed, extended his gloved hand and pointed to the immobile rocket hovering in the air nearby. Dario understood what the subject was indicating, but he resisted leaving the relative safety offered by the Delta V's short wings. After all, between the two ships was a stretch of about 20 meters of absolute vacuum, with the cloud bed beneath and 1,000 meters below the Pacific's embrace. "I can smell it," he heard Franz Schwartz say, who at that moment was leaving the cockpit. "They're inviting you to walk to their craft. Try it, man. We've already seen that nothing happens to them walking on the vacuum." At that moment, someone pressed a hard object against the Brazilian's back, which he felt through his flight suit and then moved forward. When his foot lifted into the air to leave the support of the wing's steel, something stirred in his stomach. He remembered he had a parachute he could open past the cloud bank, which gave him some security. Then he squinted his eyes, looking at the blue rocket in front of him, and let his foot drop. The first sensation was falling into the abyss. But it didn't happen that way, and without his soles finding any apparent support, he felt he was walking on nothing. The sensation could be likened to being able to walk on water or sponge. Springs in his feet. Sponge fiber soles. He got no answer. And he walked on nothing, with his gaze fixed on the device in front of him, which, according to Schwartz, came from Antares, the red sun of Scorpio, located 155 light-years away from our solar system, also mythologically called Ares' rival. Then Dario, turning his face, saw Karen and Schwartz walking just like him above nothingness. The German smiled at him amusingly. He also saw the strange, simian little men advancing behind them. Karen Vassiliev, waving her short skirt, walked stealthily, as if fearing the invisible barrier that was holding them up would suddenly disappear. Dario liked the young woman, who knew how to appreciate a beautiful figure wherever he found one. A good trophy for starting a fight. As soon as Dario reached the metallic wall of the blue spaceship, his feet landed on a ladder extended from the hatch. He climbed it, calmer, and arrived at the opening leading into the ship. A man, clad in a kind of blue spacesuit, was waiting on one side, pointing with his tentacle toward the interior. And Cox entered the opening without fear. The footsteps of his followers echoed behind and above him. Then they all entered a narrow, low, cold, dark, and silent hallway, similar to a decompression chamber. A door blocked their path, and another closed behind them. The only thing that caught Dario's attention was the floor, which was marked by two recessed rails that seemed to disappear beyond the gates. "What do you think about this, Professor?" asked Dario to the German. But the other didn't answer, as he was watching the little men jumping down the ladders. Dario felt pushed forward. The door that was blocking his path slowly opened, and a hallway, illuminated by a paradisiacal blue and gold light, stretched before him. Next to the gate that had opened was a man, and upon seeing him, Dario exclaimed, since the man looked and appeared like someone from Earth. "Welcome aboard the Valther II, gentlemen," said the man in perfect Esperanto, with a playful intonation. "Come this way." Dario saw a man around 60 years old, wrinkled and dry, though he possessed a strange liveliness, moving with the agility typical of a young athlete. He dressed more or less in Earth's fashion, though his clothes were tight and made of metallic fabric. On his wrist, he wore a German model shortwave radio emitter watch, very similar to the one Dario Cox himself used. The hallway led the prisoners, if they could be called that, to a large central chimney, from the depths of which a tremendous noise was rising. Looking down through the chimney, whose diameter exceeded 100 meters, and leaning on the railing, Dario could see a huge aerodynamic engine working by moving cranks and metallic supports in a synchronized and rhythmic manner. "It's curious, isn't it, Mr. Cox?" asked the man guiding them, pointing below. Cox turned as if stung by a needle. Karen and Schwartz also turned, stopping, surprised. "How do you know my name?" asked Dario. "I know many things you don't," replied the man. "But don't hold a grudge against me too much. Besides, I've saved your lives." "You saved our lives?" interjected Schwartz. Yes, she ordered that your aerial carcass be destroyed. I of course did my little politics, and to some extent I think I won. Yes, believe me. But come, we can't waste time now. They continued descending the spiral ramp until they reached a side door, hermetically sealed. Above it, Dario saw a golden plaque and an inscription in strange characters. The guide seemed to guess their thoughts and said, "If you could read the Zokla symbols, you would know that it says the air inside is suitable for nature 22, which corresponds to our Earth's atmosphere." Dario was astonished. And without saying a word, he entered, following the old man, through that door, which automatically closed when Karen Vasiev passed through, halting their progress. Everything was plunged into complete darkness, but the old man activated a switch and the light came on. Then they could see they were in a room of regular dimensions, round, around which there were several doors. In the center stood a large table with books, magazines, and various devices, including a classic automatic television. There were even flower pots with exotic plants of Earth origin. Isn't all of this well prepared? These doors are comfortable and cozy bedrooms. The man was listing the doors with a smile on his lips. Now settle in, because I suspect your stay here is going to be long. Look, my dear Cox, how we've gone from hunters to the hunted, Franz Schwartz laughed softly. Well, friends, I'll leave you. I have to attend a council meeting, but I'll be back this afternoon. As for you, Mr. Schwartz, I hope you will be very careful not to misuse your little device, the Thomason, as you call it, which we haven't wanted to take from you out of pure courtesy. And without waiting for a response from the stunned Earthlings, he left the room, closing the door behind him. The three prisoners, as they could be considered, looked at each other. And the first to react was Dario, who slumped into a reclining armchair, letting out a loud laugh. This is very funny, you stowaways. And now tell me, what can we do? The German walked around the room several times and then stopped. Aren't we where we intended to be, Karen? He asked. Yes, Franz, we are. But now what? The German turned to the puzzled Dario and replied, I'm going to lay all the cards on the table, Mr. Cox, and I'll hand over command to you. I'm just a scientist, and escaping from here isn't within my expertise. Miss Vasiev is in the same condition as I am. If you can contact your department in Brasilia, you'll receive instructions from General Sutton. He was the one who introduced us into your craft, according to Commander Bershin. I see you change methods frequently, stowaway, replied Dario Cox. Why are you bringing up General Sutton now? You have a team of collaborators, don't you, Mr. Cox? They are Basil Tyrrell and Mark O'Brien, and they are universally known as the three suicides of the cosmos, the German continued speaking. You are all people of high and recognized valor. Well, after this preamble, I hope you'll understand me better. The United Nations Private Council has ordered both me and Dr. Karen Vasiev to meet with you to investigate certain strange facts discovered by the international police. It concerns nothing less than an extragalactic spaceship that has been operating on Earth for some time. Precisely this one we're in now. Do you understand, Mr. Cox? No, the young man responded. Listen to me, intervened the sculptural Russian woman. Professor Schwartz is telling you the truth. The interests of the entire world are in destroying this cosmic ship, no matter what. And this is the mission assigned to you and your group. We are involved in this to recover everything scientific and useful that can be recorded and examined in Professor Schwartz's microcellular counter. Now I get it. Dario jumped in his seat. The old man has deceived us. These people didn't want to destroy us, as he said. I suspect that guy is a fraud, a renegade, or something like that. I'd like to know who she is. Listen, Cox, the German continued, it's simple. Q. Paul, whom you've been ordered to contact in Sydney, fought in vain to clarify this mystery. But apparently, he must have discovered something important, as he was recently killed by simply blowing his head off with a low-powered atomic shot. However, it was assumed that you could follow the lead found by Paul, starting from Sydney. That's why we were urgently asked to meet with you. Operation Bait, ordered by General Sutton, was carried out with a bit of discreet indiscretion, and the result has been that these beings have come out to meet us, exactly as Sutton expected. And has my boss forged this stupid plan? Stupid no, Mr. Cox, exclaimed Schwartz. To me it is. Why should I go through subterfuges with you? General Sutton has taken command of the United Nations Military Coordination Service, exclaimed Karen in turn. That can't be, protested Dario vehemently. How could Sutton devise such a bundle of nonsense? Besides, Clark would have called me to his office and given me explanations before acting. You all have proven to me to be stupid, inept, and moronic, or maybe I'm the idiot, unworthy of the old trust. Don't count on me for anything. And while these frogs dressed in blue are preparing the altar for our Holocaust, I plan to take a stroll on something cushioned before continuing to listen to nonsense. Dario, with a yawn, headed to one of the bedroom doors. Upon opening it, he found what he expected, a large, very comfortable bunk bed. And without relying on anyone, just as he was, still dressed in his flight suit, he lay down on the soft bed, setting aside his space protection helmet. Shortly after, he was sound asleep. In the adjacent room, the Russian woman was wringing her hands and pacing rapidly around the central table. Everything has been meticulously recorded, Karen, said Franz Schwartz, satisfied. If we get out of this mess, I'll build another Thomason and give it to you. I'd like to be able to explain its microcellular and photoelectronic functions to you, so you can understand its multiple applications. Everything you hear and see is recorded, imprisoned in its hermetic capsules, and then allows it to be analyzed in the laboratory. This is worth millions, Karen, millions. Why doesn't that man believe us, Franz? She interrupted him. Bah! Don't pay him any mind. These fighters are very special. They distrust everyone by nature. But I know Cox is quite the gentleman. You just have to look at his face. You'll see how he finds a way out of here. Besides, your other two companions, Tyrrell and O'Brien, are alerted. We could hear them through the shortwave radio emitter installed in the DELTA-5. We know that was the action plan. And why didn't General Sutton mention Dario Cox? She asked. You have such a poor memory, Karen. Dario Cox has very personal work methods, and Sutton wants things to be this way. If Cox had been aware of everything from the start, maybe the outcome wouldn't have been the same. As for the DELTA-5, logically, once the anti-gravity ceased, it would have continued flying or fallen into the sea. One way or another, those guys from the Hawaii aerial fleet would have already set in motion. I understand they act in a lightning-fast manner. That's what General Sutton said. Tyrrell and O'Brien will soon be around us, looking for a way to get us out of this jam. And with Dario Cox among us, the solution won't take long to emerge. Yes, exclaimed Karen, annoyed. You see what that conceited Superman did, fell asleep. I don't trust any of them. Obviously, I don't know them, but I doubt we'll end well. For what it's worth, I already said goodbye to my little garden house in Casavoro Yellow. There, I had snowflowers in the greenhouse. Have you ever seen red snowflowers, dear Professor?